The Justice Department just released 3 files on Jeffrey Epstein that they fought for years to keep hidden. Tonight, in which side we open them. Good evening. I'm your host on Behind the Trend, short stories, big insights. Tonight, a story that millions of people around the world have been waiting years to hear. The United States Department of Justice has just released 3 previously withheld reports from its internal files on
According
Jeffrey
to newly
Epstein,
released reports, the
the
FBI
convicted sex
interviewed a
offender
woman 4
and
times in
financier
2019.
whose network
She
of
claims
powerful connections has haunted governments, institutions, and public trust for over a decade. These reports were buried, classified, kept from the public eye while officials offered vague explanations about ongoing investigations and institutional sensitivity. Now, they are out, and what they reveal, and perhaps more importantly, what they still leave unanswered, is something every citizen deserves to understand. Tonight, we are going to walk through what these files contain, why they were withheld, what they tell us about how power operates in the shadows, and why this moment matters far beyond one man's crimes.
We are going to win.
Let us
and
begin.
Win big. The people
Let
are
us
with
start
us.
with the facts.
This is crucial
what
for our
exactly
future,
has been
believe me.
released? The Department of Justice has made public 3 internal reports that were previously classified or withheld from public disclosure. These reports are connected to federal investigations into Jeffrey Epstein, specifically examining how law enforcement and federal prosecutors handled the Epstein case at various stages over the past 2 decades. The first report, and arguably the most significant, examines the circumstances surrounding the 2008 plea deal in Florida. That was the deal Agnew brokered by then U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta that allowed Epstein to plead guilty to state prostitution charges rather than face federal sex trafficking charges. He received just 13 months in a county jail with work release privileges that allowed him to leave the facility 6 days a week. 13 months, work release, for crimes that involved dozens of underage victims. That deal, known as the non-prosecution agreement, has been described by legal experts as one of the most lenient and controversial plea arrangements in modern American legal history. Victims were not informed of the deal before it was finalized, a direct violation of the Crime Victims' Rights Act, as a federal judge later ruled. The second report addresses the Justice Department's internal review of its own handling of the case, essentially an investigation into whether prosecutors committed misconduct or exercised poor judgment. This is the report that victims' advocates have been demanding for years. The third report, which is shorter but no less important, examines the period between Epstein's release from jail in 2009 and his arrest in July 2019 by federal agents in New York. A 10-year window during which Epstein continued to travel, socialize with powerful figures, and, according to multiple accusers, continued to commit crimes. 3 reports covering over a decade of decisions and failures by the most powerful law enforcement agency on earth. The question tonight is not just what these documents say. The question is why it took this long for the public to see them. For those who may not be fully familiar with the Epstein case, or who have heard fragments but never the full picture, let me take a moment to walk through the essential timeline. Because context matters. And this story has layers that go far deeper than most people realize. Jeffrey Epstein was a financier based in New York. His wealth was enormous, though its origins have never been fully explained. He owned a mansion in Manhattan, a ranch in New Mexico, a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and properties in Paris and Florida. He cultivated relationships with some of the most powerful and prominent people in the world: politicians, business leaders, academics, royalty. Names that have appeared in flight logs, visitor records, and legal depositions include former presidents, sitting senators, billionaire tech founders, and members of the British royal family. But behind the wealth and the connections of behind the private jets and the dinner parties, prosecutors allege that Epstein was running a systematic operation to recruit groom, and sexually abuse underage girls. Dozens of victims have come forward. Their testimonies describe a pattern that was methodical, organized, and enabled by people around Epstein who either participated or looked the other way. In 2005, the FBI opened an investigation after a victim's parent contacted police in Palm Beach, Florida. The investigation gathered substantial evidence. Federal prosecutors prepared a 53-page indictment that could have sent Epstein to prison for life.
Our nation's future.
That indictment was never filed. Instead, the 2008 plea deal happened, and the victims were left in the dark. For over a decade, questions swirled. How did this happen? Who intervened? Were powerful people protected? Then in July 2019, Epstein was arrested again, this time by federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York. New charges, new evidence, a second chance at justice.
According to newly released
1 month
reports,
later,
the FBI
on
interviewed
August
a woman
10th,
4 times in 2019.
Jeffrey
She claims
Epstein was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. The official ruling was suicide. That ruling has been questioned, debated, and challenged by forensic experts, journalists, and members of the public ever since. His death meant there would be no trial, no public testimony under oath, no cross-examination, no moment where Epstein would be compelled to answer the question that millions of people around the world were asking: who else was involved?
We are going to win, and
Now,
win big.
let us
The
examine
people are
what
with
these
us.
newly
This is
released
crucial
reports
for our
actually
future,
tell
believe
us.
me.
And I want to be precise here, because in a case this sensitive, precision matters. The first report, examining the 2008 plea deal, confirms what many suspected but could not prove. The deal was negotiated with an unusual level of secrecy. Communication between Epstein's legal team and federal prosecutors occurred through channels that were not standard. Victims were deliberately kept uninformed, and the report acknowledges that this was not an oversight. It was a choice. The report stops short of using the word corruption, but it uses language that legal analysts have described as remarkably pointed for an internal government document.
Isn't it?
Phrases like significant procedural irregularities, departure from established protocols, an exercise of discretion that warrants scrutiny. The second report, the internal review of prosecutorial conduct, is perhaps the most frustrating for those seeking accountability. It concludes that while the handling of the case reflected, and I am quoting here, poor judgment and a lack of sensitivity to the rights of victims, it did not rise to the level of professional misconduct under the department's own standards. Let me say that again. The Department of Justice investigated itself and concluded that its own attorneys made serious errors, but that those errors were not technically misconduct. For victims and their advocates, this distinction feels not like justice, but like a technicality designed to protect the institution. The third report, covering the years between 2009 and 2019, raises what may be the most disturbing questions of all. It documents multiple instances where credible information about Epstein's continued criminal activity was available to law enforcement, and no action was taken. Tips from victims, reports from concerned citizens, information from foreign law enforcement agencies, all of it entered the system, and the system did not act. The report does not explain why. It documents the failures, yes, but offers no definitive explanation for the inaction. It leaves readers to draw their own conclusions. And that silence, that gap between documented failure and accountability, is at the heart of why this case continues to haunt the American justice system. This brings us to a critical question. If these reports existed, if the Justice Department had already investigated itself and documented these failures, why were they withheld from the public for so long? The official explanation has evolved over time. Initially, the department cited ongoing investigations, arguing that releasing the reports could compromise active cases. Then, after Epstein's death and the conviction of his associate Ghislaine Maxwell in 2021, the justification shifted to concerns about privacy, institutional reputation, and this phrase appeared repeatedly: deliberative process privilege. Deliberative process privilege is a legal doctrine that allows government agencies to withhold internal documents that reflect their decision-making process. It is meant to protect candid internal debate. But critics, including members of Congress from both political parties, have argued that in this case, the doctrine was used not to protect debate, but to protect embarrassment. Pressure mounted from multiple directions. Victims' attorneys filed lawsuits. Congressional committees issued demands. Investigative journalists filed Freedom of Information requests that were delayed, partially fulfilled, or denied outright. The release we are seeing now did not happen because the Justice Department suddenly decided transparency was important. It happened because the political and legal pressure became impossible to resist. And that, in itself, tells us something important about how power works in a democracy. Information that the public has a right to know does not always flow freely. Sometimes it has to be pulled, dragged into the light. The question we should be asking is not just what is in these files. The question is, what else is still being withheld, and on whose authority? Let us step back now and look at the bigger picture. Because the Epstein case is not just about one man. It never was. This case sits at the intersection of wealth, power, law enforcement, and accountability. And the patterns it reveals extend far beyond Jeffrey Epstein. Pattern number one, the two-tiered justice system. The 2008 plea deal is a textbook example of what happens when an individual has enough wealth and enough connections to negotiate a fundamentally different outcome than an ordinary citizen would face.
This is a great spot, isn't it?
A public school teacher facing similar charges would have received decades in federal prison. Epstein received 13 months in county jail with work release. The system did not treat him equally, and these reports confirm it. Pattern number two, institutional self-protection. The DOJ investigated itself and found serious errors, but not misconduct. This is a pattern we see repeated across institutions, from police departments to intelligence agencies to corporate boards. When institutions investigate themselves, the conclusion almost always stops just short of the line that would require real consequences. Pattern number three got the power of silence. Epstein's network survived for decades, not just because of what people did, but because of what people chose not to say. Enablers, bystanders, people who saw warning signs and looked away, people who attended the parties, flew on the planes, visited the island, Hakuya, and later claimed they saw nothing, knew nothing, suspected nothing. These reports name some individuals. They reference others without naming them, and they leave vast territories of this story unexplored. The victims, and there are hundreds of them, have waited years for answers. Some have received financial settlements. A few have seen Ghislaine Maxwell convicted and sentenced. But the broader network, the facilitators, the recruiters, the powerful figures who allegedly participated, remains largely unaccounted for. And until that changes, until every name is known, every role is documented, and every individual is held to the same legal standard regardless of wealth or status, the Epstein case will remain an open wound in the American justice system. So where do we go from here? Congressional leaders from both parties have called for further hearings. Victims' attorneys have indicated they will use these reports to support ongoing civil litigation. And investigative journalists are already combing through the details, like cross-referencing names, dates, and locations with existing evidence. The release of these three reports is not the end of this story. It may be the beginning of a new chapter, but that chapter will only be written if the public continues to demand it. If media organizations continue to investigate, if lawmakers continue to push, and if the principle that no one, No one is above the
We are
law
going
is
to win
treated
and
not
win
as a
big.
slogan,
The
but as a
people are with us.
standard.
This is crucial
That is
for
what
our
accountability
future,
looks
believe me.
like. Not a single headline, not a single document release, but sustained, relentless, principled pressure until the truth, all of it, is known. That is our report for tonight on Behind the Trend. This story is far from over, and as long as it continues, we will be here to break it down for you. Clearly, calmly, factually. If this report helped you understand what just happened and why it matters, please subscribe to this channel, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and turn on notifications because when the next chapter breaks, you will want to know. Short stories, big insights, that is our promise. I will see you in the next one.